Hi, welcome back to Wu Says. This is another episode for you where we get real about the US, China, and everywhere and everything in between. Two superpowers, one global story. US President Donald Trump has renewed his threat to slap hefty tariffs on 14 countries, including US allies like Japan and South Korea. And his message is buy more from us or pay the price. So we're going to decode today what he means by that. What is this all about? Is it about trade or is it about power? I'm Melisa, Idris, and joining me to unpack this is Professor Thye, who has been studying US-China relations long before tariffs became global headline news. So Prof. Wu, let's start there. I mean, what is President Trump trying to achieve with this latest round of tariff threats? I mean, do you think he has a strategy at play here? What do you think?
Well, there are two reasons which I had given back in April 2nd when he declared the National Liberation Day, in which he said he would put tariffs on 185 countries. And it would happen at midnight, April 9th. And as we know, 14 hours later, he paused the tariff and declared that we will have 90 days of truce so that we can get down to the business of negotiating. Mm-hmm. The reason he did that, of course, was the US financial markets went into a deep dive, basically showing that smart money thought that this declaration of war on the entire world is going to end very badly for the United States as well. So he declared a truce. And in declaring the truce, he said we'll have 90 trade deals in 90 days. And what were the chief goals? The first goal is we will stop these countries from ripping us off as in the last 80 years. Ripping the United States off means that you run a trade, the United States runs a trade deficit with the country. In other words, that country is selling its product to us and not willing and keeping our products out. So it's ripping us off. So the first goal is to stop them from ripping us off. The second goal is to bring back manufacturing jobs to the US. These are the publicly announced goal. But there's a third one, which is very important, which drives this second round of tax tariff. And that is, we want you to be better friends with the United States than with other major powers in the world. Basically, if you want access to the US market, we would want you to join our sphere of influence. That's the third. And this will come out very clearly as we talk about this round of threats. Okay. And of course, this was a very ambitious goal to have 90 trade deals in 90 days. And what have we got? We've got 3 trade deals so far. A trade deal with Vietnam and with the United Kingdom and with China. But in the case of the UK and China, there are more principles on which further negotiation would be undertaken. So that is not a done deal yet. They just have a framework for negotiating. And why has it been going so slowly? It has been going slowly because the nature of bargaining is usually it takes 3-4 years for countries to reach trade deals. But more importantly, the United States Court of International Trade, there is a court in the United States that rules on trade disputes. It's a US court. The US court says that the tariffs that were imposed were not justified by the congressional act that allowed Donald Trump to impose emergency tariffs. That act of Congress is known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So if the country faces an emergency, the president has the right to respond. And in this case, he declared war on the entire international trade system. And the courts in the US ruled that it's illegal. And it is under appeal. So if you were negotiating with the US, it means that if the US loses the appeal, then the tariffs are gone. And if Trump does win the appeal, which looks like it might happen because the Supreme Court has been ruling in Trump's favor on most of the big things that have come out. Well, if the Supreme Court rules that he was justified and declared emergency, then we will negotiate. So the process of negotiation has always been a protracted one. And the second one is there is this court case hanging, which says that what he's done is against US laws. So that's part of the reason why it has been moving so slow.
Can I ask you, when you said, so you started the conversation with the premise that the US thinks all these countries, all the other countries are ripping it off, right? Just and this tariff threat is premised on the fact that you should be better friends with the US, with us, the US, than you should be with other countries. And one of the things that I thought was quite interesting was Donald Trump also had warned on tariffs for nations that aligned with what he called anti-American policies of BRICS, particularly of BRICS. And I'm curious to know what you think about that. What do you think qualifies as anti-American in this context? I mean, is non-alignment seen as hostility now to Donald Trump?
To be non-anti-US is to accept US leadership of the global system. In other words, continue US domination of the United Nations agency, like the World Bank. The World Bank has always been under an American, and second highest position at the IMF has always been an American. And if you go, the US, of course, has been paying a large proportion of the bills of these organizations. So many other countries have said, why don't you let us increase our contribution to these international organizations? And because once they increase their contribution, their voting power also goes up. So the US has so far blocked the expansion of the size of international institutions. And the US also wants to keep the system at the United Nations where its veto is able to overcome the position of the majority of the rest of the world. So it is to be friendly to the US in Donald Trump's sense is that continue to accept the United States as the global leader.
Right.
That would be sensible if the United States are able to play the role of a global leader. What is the role of a global leader? It's just like when a boss goes out to lunch with his colleague, he picks up the tab. Basically, that's part of what the boss's job is. You all listen to me, and I buy you lunch. So the United States is less capable of supporting the amount of, is incapable of supplying the amount of resources to solve the world's problems. Basically, we need the Chinese the Japanese and the other developing countries like India to enlarge the capital base of the international agencies so that the international agencies can do their jobs, not only in terms of helping economic development, but in fighting climate change. To be a leader means that we take the lead on fighting the threats to human existence, climate change, biodiversity protection, and keeping peace in the world. All these are very expensive activities. And now the US, unlike before, doesn't have because these problems have increased in size and it's gotten more expensive. And other countries have become a lot richer. So the US alone is unable to financially bail the world out. Okay. That's the reason why we want a more inclusive leadership. And I see this as a temporary phase in US behavior because I believe that the rest of the world will be able to talk sense into the United States at some point.
Well, it seems that even if you are friends with the US, you are not spared from Trump's tariff threats, because we had Japan and South Korea also included in the receiving end of these threats. So what do you think, what message do you think Trump is sending to his friends, his allies, his traditional US allies?
I think to his traditional allies, there are two things going on. One is his assessment that they cannot do without the United States. For example, look at Europe. They are after what Putin is doing in Ukraine. What we saw immediately was Sweden and Finland that were outside NATO joined NATO because they interpreted that the world, let's not be naive, the mighty will eat the weak, and the only way to prevent the mighty from eating us is to have another big giant beside us. And the giant is the United States. Because the US sees itself as indispensable to their defense, the US can afford to ask for sacrifice from them. Because the United States at the very beginning was perfectly happy to bear most of the cost of NATO so that its allies could spend its money on infrastructure, economic investments to become richer. Now that they have become richer, they are still not they have not been used to spending money to defend themselves. So Donald Trump sees this unjustified sense of entitlement by them. But of course, in return for the US protection, they have always voted with the UN a lot of times in the United Nations. They have not opposed the US in international forums. Mm-hmm. Like you look at Australia, the United States prevented Japan from invading Australia during World War II. So the Australians know that they will always they are not big enough by themselves to defend. They need a big brother. That's why Australia has always gone to war, every war that the US starts or participate in. Yeah. It's in Vietnam, it's in Iran, it's in Afghanistan. You said it, the Australians are out on the front line. So that is one reason. And the second reason is Donald Trump wants them to be the pillars of the US sphere of influence. Mm. The goal is to be able to get most of Southeast Asia, for example, to be in the US sphere of influence. Like, for example, in the letter that Donald Trump sends our king on the second round of tariffs. The letter is very interesting. The letter starts, I'm just paraphrasing. The letter starts off with, "It is my great honor to write to you about the relationship we have with your great country, the relationship with the extraordinary economy of the United States of America, the #1 market in the world." And it says, "But unfortunately, you've been running trade deficits. We have been running trade deficits with you. In the case of Malaysia, we will put only 25% tariff on you." And then he goes on to say, "This tariff rate can be adjusted upward or downward, depending on the relationship between the two countries. And you will not be disappointed in the United States of America." That's how the letter ended. Now, when he talks about the tariff will depend on the state of relationship between our two countries, it means that it is more than just the size of the trade deficit between us. It means that if you are too close to China, if you allow Chinese factories to be set up and export to the United States, well, then we're going to put up higher tariffs on you. And if you do not vote with us in the United Nations, well, then we may put up higher tariffs against you. So that letter is, I think it should be required reading for everybody of how to write a non-diplomatic letter in the most bombastic manner possible, with it reeking of insincerity throughout the letter. Basically, it's a threat. That was quite amazing. That's why I think that this has to be a temporary phase in US history. No normal country would, that's not normal diplomatic communications. So that's why I think it is very important for the rest of us to keep the world together until the US gets over its populist phase, gets over its present bad mood, and then it can then be a member of the Council of Elders in running the world. But until then, we, the rest of us, have to hang together in order to fight climate change, maintain global prosperity by keeping free trade, and help to keep the peace in other places of the world. That's what is important. And you could see that Donald Trump is very conscious of that. What he's doing might cause people to gang up against him, which is why he has reacted yesterday very strongly against Brazil. He imposed 50% tariff on Brazil yesterday. But on April 2nd, he had only imposed 10%. But yesterday, this is one of the few cases where the number actually jumped. On almost every case, the number that he announced is smaller than the number he had come up with on April 2nd. For the case of Brazil, it jumped from 10 to 50. So what has happened? And the amazing thing is, what is the trade balance between Brazil and the United States? The United States runs a trade balance surplus of $68 million against Brazil. The United States sells more to Brazil than buying coffee from Brazil. So, by Donald Trump's definition, since Brazil is running a trade deficit against the US, that means that the US has been ripping Brazil off. by his
His
criteria.
definition. His
Because
definition. Yeah.
so you could see that this 50% has nothing to do with Brazil's been ripping off the United States. This 50% comes about for two reasons. One is Brazil is brazen enough to organize a BRICS conference, which ended with a criticism against the US wrecking of the global trade system, and with the US attack on Iran. Of course, it condemned not only the US attack on Iran, it also condemned the Israeli attack on Iran and the Russian invasion of Ukraine, albeit that the invasion of Ukraine was mentioned only once. So the US is trying hard to prevent collective action by the rest of the world to gang up against this madness. And the other reason why Brazil has been hit with 50% is because the former president of Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, Bolsonaro is a Trump-like figure. When he lost his election to Lula, he incited a riot to try to take over Congress too. And Brazil, possibly being a more law-abiding country, has put Bolsonaro on trial and restricted his liberty. So Donald Trump is saying, I don't like you putting this kind of people in jail, and you are being unfair to Bolsonaro, who is like me. So I'm going to put 50% on you. He says it explicitly. You shouldn't be prosecuting Bolsonaro. This is called interference in the political affairs of another country.
Yeah.
Has nothing to do with trade. It's not that Brazilian coffee that they sell to the US is of a low quality. That's why you have something to complain about.
Right.
But it was brazen enough to be part of BRICS that called the US, irresponsible for breaking the WTO system.
Wow. Wow. So when you talk about this, so Trump really does not like it when countries band together, when there's collective action, is something that he's afraid, he is cognizant of or worried about. So if we were to look at this region, some of the smaller, medium countries on that list, places like Laos, like Cambodia, Malaysia, can I ask you what this means now? I mean, are we now in a world, the world of Donald Trump, where each country must continue to individually negotiate its way out of being tariffed by the US because of his aversion to collective action? So he wants to keep every country separate. Is that the way forward now, Prof?
I think that it's very hard to have a collective ASEAN bargaining position because, look, the Vietnamese already have a deal. The Vietnamese had a deal and achieved it very quickly because the Secretary General of the Communist Party is up for reappointment in a few months. And the United States is its single biggest trade partner. And its biggest, the chief destination of its exports is the United States. And so if the economy tanks before the party congress, Mr. To Lam might well be in the lamb. So that's why Vietnam quickly entered into negotiations. The truth is, we are not anti-US. None of us are. We are all great admirers of what America as a country and the values that it had stood for. Look, it's possibly the only country that fought a civil war in order to end slavery in its own territory. That is the ultimate sacrifice. That is idealism. That's an example, right? So we should continue. We can negotiate individually with the US, but at the same time, we could work together to keep the global trade system together and to keep the UN system together. In other words, if the United States does not want to supply leadership in the United Nations, let us work among ourselves to keep it going. If the US does not want to fight climate change, we will continue to fight climate change and wait for the day when the United States comes back and lend its shoulder to building being part of the green transformation.
Yeah.
So I do not see it as ganging up against the US. It is, we make up for the absence of the US in maintaining global prosperity. We keep free trade among ourselves. So we will definitely do the bilateral negotiations with the US because, as Donald Trump assured us, you will never be disappointed in the United States. And we do not want to disappoint the United States. So, no, it would be foolish to be antagonistic about it. It is to recognize that the person's in a bad mood right now. So we might have to yield a little bit to help him get over the mental angst.
The tantrum.
Yeah, and show that there will always be a revered place for you when you return. I think that's what the rest of the world should do. And ASEAN is quite small, so we will not be able to hold the rest of the world together by ourselves. But if we work together with Japan and Korea are definitely US allies.
Yeah.
Japan has over 100 US military bases on its soil, so it has to be a US ally. But it doesn't mean that it cannot be a responsible global citizen.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it would have to be anti-international trade like Donald Trump, and it doesn't mean that it has to give China the finger, as Mr. Donald Trump seems to want everybody to do. So I think the rest of us act as adults while somebody is in rehabilitation.
Prabhu, this was fantastic. Thank you so much for that analysis, helping us put this into perspective and for getting real about the US and China and everywhere and everything in between. So thank you for that. And that's it for this episode of Who Says. I'm Melisa Idris. I will see you same time next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.